Hey artists! Welcome to another tutorial. Today we're going to be learning how to paint this adorable pup. I had the pleasure of painting this custom pet portrait for somebody that I know, so I just wanted to share some tips with you on how you can paint your own dog. In this tutorial, I'm going to be painting with oil paints, but you can also get the same effect with acrylics. I highly recommend using a slow drying medium with your acrylics to extend that drying time, and it's just going to make your painting process so much easier. You can also find a list of colors that I used here on the screen. Now, if you're craving more help and want the full real-time tutorial complete with my voice walking you through every single moment, paint mixing recipes, reference photos, and more, I think you will love the Wildlife Painting Academy. New tutorials are added each month, and it truly is your secret weapon for learning how to paint realistic wildlife easily. You can check it out in the description of this video. So I started off by transferring my sketch to my surface, and I used graphite to kind of build a little bit more onto my sketch. Basically all I did was kind of flesh out where some of the main shadows are going to go and the main features, and then I used dilute acrylic paint just so I wasn't working with a white canvas anymore. And then once that was dry, I went in with my oils. So I started off, I'm always using a really large brush when I'm starting off, and I like to map out the darkest parts of my painting first. Now I'm going in and moving through to lighter portions, so still working really dark here, working with a really dark brown and just kind of filling in different areas. I grabbed a bit of a smaller brush and I'm just going to throw some detail into this nose to start to build up the structure a little bit first. Noses are such weird shapes that my best advice for painting realistic noses is to forget that it's a nose and instead look at your reference photo as basically a collection of abstract shapes and try your best to kind of capture that instead of intentionally painting a nose. So now I'm going in and starting to block in other areas of my painting. So this pup had a bit of a white patch on the top of its nose, so I'm going in with various shades of gray to start to build that up. So this fur here that has a beautiful golden sort of rusty tone to it, I'm using a lot of burnt sienna here because it's just such a beautiful warm color, and it's going to work really well for this tone of fur. So I'm working different areas of the painting, always looking at my reference photo, just trying to emulate those colors and tones as well as I can, building up the nice structure of the face. This pup here has nice white fur around its mouth and its muzzle, but when you're painting white fur, you want to make sure that you're not jumping immediately into that pure white paint. You want to have a chance to build it up slowly. So your first layer is going to end up being kind of a light to medium tone gray. Now I'm just kind of layering in some dark paint throughout different areas to start to build up that structure of the face. I let my painting dry for a few days and then I started to go in with some detail here. I'm just using a small round brush in order to build up some of the detail on that nose. So the nose itself is kind of pebbled in texture, so that's why I'm actually dabbing my brush, making those tiny little dabbing motions in order to build up that texture. The tiny little hairs around the nose and on the muzzle were so much fun. Basically, I'm just taking tiny little brush strokes here, slowly building up that fur texture. I wanted to strengthen the structure of the face, so I went in with some darker paints here, so using a lot of burnt umber and burnt sienna and really starting to build that up. Now into that wet paint, I'm going to start to work in the first pass of our detail layer here. So I'm going to be building up some fur texture. I'm still using a really large brush here. I'm using a filbert brush, it's my favorite shape. And I'm starting to build up the actual texture of that fur, first focusing on the shadows and then the highlights. So here I'm using the knife side of my filbert brush here to kind of get those individual strokes that are going to start to build up that fur texture. So I'm working my way around my painting here, building up that beautiful fur texture. So I wanted to work into kind of a wet base. So what I'm doing here is I'm doing a dilute wash of burnt umber around the rest of my dog. This part of the pup is going to be kind of receding into the background a little bit, so it's not going to be very detailed, but I like to work into a wet layer for this. So that's why I'm putting a nice even coat down first. And now into that wet layer, I'm going to start to actually build up some of that fur texture using my lighter tones. So I'm going back and forth, using my darker tones and then my lighter tones, kind of balancing them out as I start to build up that fur texture. Now it's time to start to put in some beautiful little details and highlights. I wanted to make sure these eyes had lots of life in them, so I went in with a tiny little brush here and started to add those highlights that really make eyes pop. I also wanted to build up a little bit more fine detail and texture for the fur in certain areas, so I'm using a small round brush here to build that up. So I wanted to show that this pup was laying on kind of a fluffy blanket, but I didn't want the blanket to be super detailed so it actually distracted from the pup. So I'm just using short little strokes here. It almost does end up looking like short pile fur. But yeah, I had lots of fun doing this part here. So just making lots of little strokes to make that fluffy blanket. So now is the fun part. I set my painting aside for a few days and now I am glazing. I wanted to add a lot of saturation into that fur to really breathe some life into it. And I also wanted to use glazes to really play with the perspective here. So I wanted certain parts of the pup to appear more receded and in shadow to really push other parts forward. So I was able to go back in with glazes and get this effect that I was looking for. So with the nose here, I went back in again with glazes and added some beautiful color here. Added just so much life. I love glazing. I cannot say enough about it. And now I'm popping in a few final details and highlights into that wet glaze layer. And don't forget your whiskers. I feel like I need a reminder to go off at the end of every painting saying, don't forget the whiskers, because I always forget them. And we're done. Hopefully you enjoyed this tutorial for how to paint a realistic portrait of a dog. Hopefully it gives you a little bit more confidence so that you can paint your own pup. They're such a pleasure to be able to paint. So yeah. I hope that you can use what you learned here to create that beautiful painting of your own. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. Please hit that big, beautiful subscribe button if you want to keep learning how to paint realistic animals and wildlife easily. If there are any animals that you want to learn how to paint, leave me a comment and I will add it to the list. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.